Well, thank you very much, and welcome to this Global Donut Days session, which is called Launching a Renewed Donut to Monitor a World Out of Balance. So, my name is Andrew Fanning. I'm the Research and Data Analysis Lead at Doughnut Economics Action Lab, or DEAL, and I'm joined here today by my colleague Kate Raworth, DEAL's co-founder and Conceptual Lead. This is the official launch of the third iteration of the Global Donuts of Social and Planetary Boundaries, which was just published as a set of resources that we can't wait to introduce to you all today. So we have been honored and blown away, honestly, by the interest in this session, which has had more than 1,000 people register to attend. As many of you know, the donut was first created by Kate back in 2012, and I have had the privilege to work closely with her on this latest update, which we are so glad to have out in the world and to be able to launch in this Global Donut Days. Kate, we made it. I just want to say hi, and that I'm excited to be co-hosting this session with you. And I wonder if you have any quick words to say hello.
Oh no, I'm just delighted to be doing this too. It's been a long time coming, and the donut is in better shape than it's ever been, I think, and it's set for a long journey ahead. So we've got an hour together here, and I'm going to just kick off by, if we want to know where the donut is now, I'm going to kick off with a little bit of history of where it's come from and how has it been evolving over time. And Andrew's going to share his screen, and I will tell us a little bit of a backstory. And as he does that, I've got you can't see my study, but it's full of all sorts of donut shaped things that I find that I get given. I've just got this little one here on my desk, and it's all about shape, the power of shapes and images. Okay, so yeah, we have renewed this global donut, and it's now a monitor. It's going to be ongoing. It's turning from a static image to an ongoing tool, which is what we're really excited about. The downside is it tells us more than we ever knew before, that the world is so extremely out of balance. But we're going to talk through the evolution of the concept so you know where it's come from and where it is today. So I'm going to click, Andrew, for the next slide. There we go. The donut has come to be a conceptual framework that can be boiled down to this essence. This is the core of what the concept is about. It's got two concentric circles. At the heart, in the hole in the middle of that donut, is critical human deprivation, a place where people are left falling short on the very essentials of life, however we define what those are. And on beyond the outer ring is a space of critical planetary degradation where we are running down the life supporting systems of this only known living planet. However we understand them, whatever we understand is the latest science on where that degradation occurs. And between the two, we can say is a minimally socially, ecologically safe and socially just space for humanity. It's a place where we meet the needs of people and we do so within the means of the living planet. So this is the core concept, and we often call this the conceptual donut diagram. And what's obvious is there are no specifications of the social foundation here. There's no specification of the ecological ceiling because we believe that those are going to continue evolving over time. How humanity commonly understands what is a social foundation that every person has a claim to, and what is the ecological ceiling as we understand more and more about the interdependencies of this delicately balanced living planet. So the donut began with this concept at its heart, with a very particular specification back in 2012. We go to the next slide. There we are. So I first drew this donut because I saw the diagram of planetary boundaries, and that's there in the bottom right-hand corner with the big red overshoots. I sat at my desk when I worked at Oxfam in 2010, and seeing that diagram with the big red overshoots and just had a visceral impact on me. The Earth system scientists have said we are overshooting the life support systems of our planet. And that creates an outer boundary beyond which humanity and the economy should not go. And I was sitting at my desk in Oxfam working on issues of social justice. And I thought, what can we, as advocates for social justice and human rights, bring to complement this framework? So I drew a circle within the circle. So I had a circle for the social foundation, but I didn't know how to fill it in. You could write in the center all human rights. You could make a long list of them. You could write human capabilities following the work of Amartya Sen. But the Earth system scientists had done something really powerful. They defined nine, which is a number that falls within our hands. It's an almost memorable number that we can get our heads around. And I felt that it was important not just to say all human rights, but to come up with a specific list. There were no sustainable development goals in those days. What there was in the run up to the Rio Plus 20 conference, which happened in Rio, on the conference on sustainable development. And an ally I knew called Felix Dodds made a very great suggestion to me. He said, look, all the world's governments have been invited to write reports as submissions to the Rio Plus 20 conference, telling the conference what their priorities are. Why don't you go through those reports and find out what are the most commonly cited social issues that the world's governments are saying? So I did exactly that. I sat down with 86 reports that were submitted by governments around the world. I went through every single line of every single one of them and noted down every single social issue that any of them mentioned. And then I included in this social foundation all social issues that were mentioned in more than half of those reports. And so it brought this set. That doesn't mean this set is perfect or correct. It includes everything. For example, it includes gender equality, but it doesn't include racial equality. But the reason for choosing that methodology was that I could then say back to the world's governments, whose social priorities are these? They're your social priorities. I crowdsourced them from you. And in fact, I was invited to present this concept of the donut at the UN General Assembly in October 2012. And I precisely was able to say that to the world's governments, these are your social priorities. So it means that all the governments in the world were calling for these social values to be at the heart of the donut. That's where this Donut 101 came from. And I also knew it was going to be incredibly important to quantify it. The Earth system scientists had quantified as much as they could of those nine planetary boundaries. We can see it there in the red. I wanted to also quantify as much as possible the social foundation. And we can see that on the next slide. So these were the two quantifications. I was working with my fantastic colleagues at Oxfam at the time. We couldn't figure out at the time how to combine the two dimensions. And so we drew them separately. There's the social foundation and there's the environmental ceiling, as I called it in those days. So the environmental ceiling is exactly redrawn from the planetary boundaries. The social foundation, I drew on indicators that were international, comparable, official from the UN, and that focused on measuring the deprivation that people experienced rather than the national average. And that was really important. So the percentage of people who do not have enough food to eat, who are malnourished, as opposed to average calorie intake, the percentage of people who were illiterate as opposed to average educational achievement, so that you get this shortfall. And you can see those orange wedges are drawn from the center of the circle outwards. So here we wanted to eliminate all of the orange. So the concept didn't quite work and we couldn't combine them. But I knew that going forward, it was going to be really important to combine them. This Donut 1.0 had much more traction and resonance in the world than I could have possibly imagined. And so it led me 5 years later in 2017, when I was publishing the book Doughnut Economics, to do an updated version of the donut. So let's have a look at that. Doughnut 2.0. So this time round, I drew again on planetary boundary science, and the Earth system scientists had updated their framework in 2015. They were measuring across more of the planetary boundaries. They were more confident of their measures because the science had been really scrutinized over the last between 2019 and 2009 and 2015. So 6 years of scrutiny. But this time round in 2017, the world's governments had now come up with the Sustainable Development Goals. And I'm told actually when they were agreeing on the Sustainable Development Goals, people who were in that negotiation say we had a picture of the donut on the table. So the donut helped inform the SDGs, and the SDGs helped inform the reiteration of donut as 2.0. So this time round, I drew for the social foundation on all the social priorities that were named in the SDGs. And that's where you get these dimensions from. So they are drawing from the Sustainable Development Goals. The SDG targets and indicators had not yet been agreed. There were draft lists. And so I was again trying to draw on things that resonated, but they weren't going to be perfectly aligned with the goals and targets of the SDGs. But they were, I always call them cousin concepts because they're closely related. So, and we've added the arrows, you can see shortfall and overshoot to help make it a self-explanatory diagram if you come across it without anybody to introduce it to you. I was also renaming some of the boundaries, particularly the Earth system boundaries. Some of the language is very technical. Novel entities actually sounds like an exciting Christmas present to some people. So I renamed it chemical pollution, and trying to use a language that people will more quickly understand, because many people, if like me, never learned Earth system science at school or university. So this was a big game of catch up to start understanding the life supporting systems on which our planet depends. So that's where the Doughnut 2.0 comes from the planetary boundaries and from the social priorities expressed in the Sustainable Development Goals. And this is what it looks like when quantified. And for the first time, we did manage to bring the diagrams into one. And I realized instead of drawing the social foundation from the center of the circle, draw it as a shortfall so that we see the red is overshoot beyond the ecological ceiling and shortfall below the social foundation, so that we want them to move in opposite directions at the same time and eliminate all of the red from this picture. That's the goal. We want to get rid of all the red. So you can see we've combined them. And this again became an iconic image when it came out. One picture bringing together these two worlds. There are many bases on which I could critique it. The social stuff looks smaller than the ecological stuff because it's drawn in circular wedges that get smaller and smaller. But this was where we landed. So 2017, it's been a long time coming to move to Doughnut 3.0. And in fact, we've been working on it, Andrew and I together, for at least 2.5 years. So here's the new Doughnut 3.0. It looks very familiar. We wanted it to look familiar. We're not trying to change the underlying concept, but some of the names and categories of the dimensions have changed. If I look at the social, for example, we've got equality. That combines gender equality, racial equality in the metrics. But on the ecological ceiling, we renamed biodiversity loss as biodiversity breakdown. We renamed nitrogen and phosphorus loading as nutrient pollution. We renamed freshwater withdrawals as freshwater disruption. So again, we were trying to make sure that all of the planetary boundary names were talking about excess. They were talking about breaching boundaries. They all sound over the top. They're too much. And to make them as intuitive as possible. So this time around, the planetary boundaries concepts and metrics that we drew on again came from the planetary boundaries update that was done by the Earth System scientists in 2023. And the social foundation is inspired by the Sustainable Development Goals, but we've incorporated other things that people have said are important through a consultation with some fantastic experts. Other things that are important that might not be reflected in the SDGs. So we've not stuck entirely to them, but the concepts are deeply inspired by them. And for the quantification, we can have a look at that. And I'm going to hand over to Andrew, because Andrew has been the data guru, who I like to say he crunches data for breakfast, who really has made this possible. And it's been the most fantastic collaboration working on this together. So yeah, big drum roll. Here is Doughnut 3.0. Andrew, I'm going to hand over to you at this point to talk us through what we're looking at.
Well, thank you so much, Kate. And once again, it has been an honor and a privilege to be on this process, which has taken much longer than either of us expected, I think, when we started out. But the end result has been deeply, deeply, I think, well, it's meant a lot to me. And I think that we've come out with something that is quite important. So Doughnut 3.0, it was published last week, just 2 weeks ago. In the journal Nature, which is a leading scientific journal, which I think is quite important for the legitimacy that this framework offers to the rest of the world. So it's been peer reviewed in one of the world's most prestigious journals, which I think is important. And we've also come out with some accompanying resources. But what this image really shows is as Kate mentioned, it's familiar when we look at it in the snapshot view, in the sense that it's really showing still far too many people, billions, are falling short of achieving their most essential needs, while at the same time we're transgressing multiple planetary boundaries based on these results, which are from 2022. At least six of the nine planetary boundaries have been transgressed. So I wanted to actually start by acknowledging a little bit of that assembling the data and what I'm about to present in this latest update. It wasn't a particularly encouraging exercise for me or for us in writing up. And I wish that there were better news to share. I certainly don't mean to bring down, this is a very important time to come together as Global Donut Days to celebrate local action and so on. But I think the spirit intended is well captured by a phrase that I liked from Amy Kaur this morning during the opening session, that we need to create hope in honesty, that we need to, by assembling the best available evidence of the current trends that we're facing, only in that way can we actually have information required to address them, or at least that's an intention that I'd like us to bring as we go through the latest results and all of the other events actually during these remarkable 3 days. So do check out the Global Donut Days program of events this week if you want to see how people are taking action. So I just mentioned the core issue is, we're falling far short and the donut we want to be in that green space. What I'd like to present is very quickly three core changes that we made kind of under the hood in terms of the data, the metrics, and the indicators, in terms of monitoring 21st century changes, disaggregating into country clusters by income level, so recognizing inequalities that can be masked by the global aggregates, and as Kate just started to mention, updating some of the dimensions and the indicators. Those are the core changes, but we've also tried to make these results as widely accessible as we can through some accompanying resources that I'll share in a moment. So one of the things that we started is if we start looking at trends over time. So transforming the donut from a snapshot into a monitor. And this chart, which we spontaneously started to call the baguette, because of course we did, it unrolls the donut to show the change in social shortfall and ecological overshoot for all 35 indicators between a start year, which was 2000, the earliest year we have, to the most recent year, 2022. And we want to, of course, be in that green space with no shortfall or overshoot. And the pink bars, they show a reduction in shortfall or overshoot, and the dark red bars show an increase in shortfall or overshoot. And the gray bar there shows missing data. So overall, we can see that humanity has made progress towards achieving the donut's social foundation, which is good news, although we have to say, given that the donut is actually measuring how can we avoid critical human deprivation, we would argue that this improvement has been modest given the extent of deprivation that is still remaining. But the five largest social improvements that we found are for internet connectivity, for the health services indicators, safe sanitation, and clean indoor fuels, among others, where 24% to 56, a quarter to half of all of humanity actually escaped shortfall in these areas over the past 2 decades, which is commendable, right? But at the same time, there are five indicators and other more that show very little improvement over the period: undernourishment, youth unemployment, unsafe drinking water, social support, while food insecurity and population living under autocratic regimes have actually worsened. And I should mention that the criteria for selecting all of these indicators very much followed the approach that Kate just mentioned, where we were aiming to look at deprivation-based metrics, that we were looking that avoid averages, if you were, where we're looking at the people in deprivation. But we were added to that the ability to find internationally comparable time series data over all of this period. Now, at the same time, we know that humanity's collective burden on the planet has generally worsened since the early 2000s, with the notable exception of ocean acidification, the ocean acidification boundary, which is roughly stable over the period. Meanwhile, none of the other indicators were moving in the right direction, 6 of them increased their extent of overshoot by 70 to 150%. And oh, the ocean acidification measure, that's one. Coincidentally, the week before we published the Doughnut 3.0 results, Earth system scientists in the Planetary Health Check Initiative published a report for 2025 showing that the ocean acidification boundary has now been breached. But where we have results only up to 2022, we could see already that more than 3/4 of the gap below the boundary in 2000 was closed over that 23-year period, and that there was only 5% of the safe space remaining based on our results. So this starts to give us an idea of how things are changing. Essentially, slow progress on a social front, but it is an improvement, just not fast enough, whereas concerning increasing degradation at a planetary scale. We can take a look at, as I was preparing for this event, I actually realized that we hadn't yet created an image to see the scale of ambition that would be required to live within the donut compared to the historical trends that we observe. So, hot off the press this morning, I made this chart to try to make this comparison visible. And it shows annual trends that we observe where for each social indicator, together with an illustrative annual trend that could eliminate social shortfall by 2030. And again, this analysis is from the peer-reviewed paper. We just hadn't produced this figure showing it yet. Now, dark red bars mean that social shortfall has been getting worse, which is not very common, thankfully, for the social indicators. Red bars mean that humanity has been reducing social shortfall, which is an improving direction that we want. And the pink bars are the ones that illustrate the ambition required to eliminate social shortfall by 2030. And this makes visible one of our headline findings that the improving trends in reducing shortfall are generally far short of what is required to eliminate critical deprivation for all people, with the need to accelerate by more than 5 times based on our median results. Now, of course, if we take that same comparison for the ecological indicators, the situation is even more challenging. So here we compare observed historical trends with an illustrative ambition to eliminate ecological overshoot by 2050. And here, all of the indicators with available data show a worsening trend. This means that to come back within planetary boundaries would require current rates of degradation to halt immediately and just reverse course at nearly twice the speed, at least based on our median results. So these are very, very challenging trends that we're facing. Now, of course, we know that these trends, humanity is not a single entity, and that these trends are being driven by different societies in both directions. So if we take a look, this is where we were able to disaggregate the global results to make visible the inequalities within global aggregates. And we did so by, at a national scale, clustering countries by income percentiles, looking at the poorest 40% of countries, the middle 40% of countries, and the richest 20% of countries. And what we could see from these charts, you can see quite clearly, is inequalities in terms of both shortfall and overshoot, with the poorest holding the greatest burden of shortfall, and the richest having less shortfall, but much more contribution to global ecological overshoot. So in fact, if we look to the poorest 40% of countries, they hold about 43% of the population, and yet they account for only 4%, based on our median results, of the ecological overshoot observed at a global scale. But they hold 63% of the social shortfall. Then on the other extreme, the richest 20% of nations, home to just 15% of the global population, including the country where I'm sitting in Spain, where Kate is in the United Kingdom, these countries are responsible for, on a median level, 44% of annual global ecological overshoot. And yet they have only a 2% share of the shortfall in the social foundations in areas such as food insecurity, health, and political peace and justice, and political voice in particular. And then we see the middle 40% of countries are somewhere in between, where they're generally more in proportion to their 43% share of population, contributing around 50% to overshoot and suffering just under, at around 33% of the shortfall. So I think in the opening session where we heard from people in Malaysia and in middle income and emerging economies, I think that these countries are actually a place where there is particularly much to learn in terms of how to reorient their economies, although really in all cases, there are different trajectories based on these different country profiles. Now, Kate already mentioned very briefly about some of the updated dimensions and indicators. So we changed the labels, some of the dimension labels, as she mentioned, both for the ecological and for the social. I think it's worth highlighting for the equality wedge, that gray missing wedge in the social foundation was actually, we were struck by the lack of internationally comparable global metrics that were tracking the racial and ethnic equality goals that are articulated in the Sustainable Development Goals. It's just there's a lack of data completely that we included this missing data wedge, actually hoping that this could inspire fellow data nerds like me to actually see a missing wedge. And it's similar to the country clusters to see that there's missing data here and work towards filling these gaps. That's the intention. And hopefully in the next update, which we're planning to update annually from now on, in the next version, we will be able to include a relevant metric. I won't go into all the detail on the updated indicators, besides just noting that there are 22 social indicators for anyone who wants to dive deeply with me into all of them. They can look into the supplementary information document, look into the published methods and results, as well as I'll mention in a moment, we've made the results and the sources critically available in an interactive webpage that anyone can access. There are 13 ecological indicators, same story. I won't go deep into the process there because I don't think we have time. However, the accompanying resources are, one is that there's the publication, which you could see in Nature, which is linked on the webpage at the bottom of this screen. Also, Kate has written The Evolving Doughnut, a report, which the landing page for this report, which I highly recommend reading, it sets out the inspiration for where the donut came from, as well as how it has evolved as she presented just earlier. It also has the latest donut diagrams, which are available to download, which I highly recommend that people pick up and use. There's full instructions. They're available in the Creative Commons. All the attributions are there. We've also created an interactive web page to try and make these results as accessible as possible. I led the development of some of the interactive visualizations, which I put a lot of love into. Hopefully you can see what it looks like. I think that you should be able to see my screen. I just wanted to briefly whiz through this interactive web page, which shows a brief description on what is the donut, the Evolving Doughnut report, as I mentioned, and this Doughnut Data Explorer, where you can hover over individual wedges, you can get more information, and critically, some of the, well, in this case, we're looking at the year 2022, so you get the levels of shortfall and overshoot for that particular year. You can look at earlier years, you can zoom out to try and see how horrible the overshoot is for the chemical pollution and biodiversity loss, biodiversity breakdown, and so on and so on. So I recommend checking this out. If you want to dive deeper into the social foundation or ecological ceiling, you're most welcome to do so. And similarly, there are the country cluster visualizations as well, and how to go deeper. So let me then bring us to the next stage, which really takes a step back and wraps up and says, this is Doughnut 3.0. These are some of the results. The trends are what it says on the tin. They're monitoring a world that is deeply out of balance. I think in terms of implications, there are two big ones that I take away from it. It's really that over the same period that we analyzed, global GDP actually doubled. And so that what we could see is this very, very modest social improvement coupled with a rapid ecological degradation at the planetary scale and the economy doubling. So clearly, in my view, the growth-based obsession with growing gross domestic product is not getting us into the global donut from both sides at the same time as we need. And so I hope that the donut can continue serving as a compass, as a monitor that can track the conception of what it means to live, to live within the donut, to meet the needs of all within the means of the living planet. It can help with identifying metrics, which, as Kate mentioned, are evolving along with the best available science. And it can show the directionality, which we urgently need to turn around, to either speed up socially and rapidly turn around ecologically. And I wanted to bring up, while I bring this up, I wonder if I missed anything here, Kate, that you wanted to add. I wanted to
That
then
was great.
wrap up that part, and we'd love to hear your questions and everything, which we'll get to in a moment. And for now, we would also love to hear your thoughts following Donut 3.0 and this evolution that we have so far described. Ask what could be the next valuable evolution of this concept. And so we prepared a little Mentimeter for anyone familiar with that. You can either go to the website that you see at the top of this screen and use a code that it will ask you for that you can see up at the top middle, or you can scan the QR code and hopefully it should work. And we can hear some thoughts. So I believe if I do this, loading, that should have enabled the Menti. And ideally, in a perfect world where we have nearly 400 people who have joined, it works for everybody, and that you can start putting your thoughts of what you think could be the next valuable evolution of this concept. And we'll spend a couple minutes for that. And then there's another process where you can kind of vote for things that you see as particularly relevant, where we'll spend a minute on that. Wait, it's working. It's working for some at least.
So there are lots of suggestions coming through here that I'm really glad to say are already part of the work that Deal is doing. Make it possible for companies to engage. There are tools for businesses, but they're not about making a company donut. But please do check out our work on donut design for business.
Goodness, there are so many. This is
Yep.
going to be some amazing homework.
Yep. This is going to keep you busy, Andrew. So somebody
Very,
says maybe even a donut on a city level. We're delighted to say there are over 50 local municipal governments around the world that have already engaged with the concept of the donut at the level of a city or a town or a district or a state. Many of them have indeed made their own city level donut, and there's fantastic tools available for that, creating a donut portrait of place.
yeah, and a similar note, I see that bioregional based donuts is another area that's it's just a really, really interesting. Well, it's a wonderful collaboration with bioregional thinking as well as this act of bringing in metrics. I know a few initiatives already that are exploring that. Dynamic concept with the most recent data available online. Did I mention we were going to update annually? I think I mentioned that. That's definitely a plan from here on in, and not to do this big major scientific publication. The idea is to kind of lean on the scientific methods and publication which have been peer reviewed to date and use that as a springboard for updating on an annual basis from here on in. I'm going to press enter to because I think there's just too many things here to be able to. Let's spend 1 minute. I believe if I press enter, then people can vote on the things that they find resonate more or less with them. And I believe I set it so that there are three opportunities to vote on different comments, which I'd love to hear if there's some kind of prioritization that gets crowdsourced out of this. And we'll take 20 more seconds for this. Wow, still ticking up, so maybe. Whoa. Now I wonder, as a data analyst, the degree to which the top of the screen biases the results relative to the bottom of the screen. So let me just say that right off the bat. But at the same time, this is super, super useful to understand. Go back further in time. That's a challenge. That's a challenge. However, it's not a challenge that I would be against by any means. Very good. Okay, well, there's a lot of homework for me to pull out
Yeah.
here. I'd love for us to move to the next session where we have around 15 minutes or so
Yep.
to get to some questions or answers there. Kate, let me pass to
Yes.
you if you have
Yep.
any.
There are plenty of questions. Our team behind the scenes have been harvesting from the chat, and there are lots of questions. I'm going to jump in with one because I think it's really important for you just to fill in on this. Lots of people have been saying, can we have donuts by country? So, Andrew, can you just tell us what already exists and big plans for the future?
Yeah, sure. So I have been involved with colleagues, especially Dan O'Neill, who's now at the University of Barcelona. We were both at the University of Leeds, where we started work on the first National Donuts study, which was published in 2018. And there we looked at 150 countries, comparing them relative to an international standards and yeah, which is important because then you can actually compare the United States to Malawi to China to and so on and so on. So that first study was published in 2018. Similarly, it was a 1 year snapshot, which we followed up in 2022 with a time series that went from the early 1990s until 2015. And all of that work is also accompanied by an interactive website, which is goodlife.leeds.ac.uk, which we can put in the chat, where you can find all of the results that are available, including donut plots and so on, that you can explore. Now, 2015 is quite some time ago. It was 10 years. And so we are very due for an update of the National Donuts. And my plan now is to work together, probably once again with Dan, to align this latest update of the donut with the National Donuts even more. And hopefully we'll be able to bring that out early in the spring of next year. And so that's very much it's now on the front burner now that we got the Global Donut update out there.
Wonderful. I'll pick up on one question that Antoine asked. He says, I wonder how Indigenous people relate to the donut model in general. The separation between environmental and social topics feels like a symptom of the inherited Western culture of human exceptionalism or separation from nature. Thanks for the question, Antoine. So what we've found, ever since the donut came out in 2012, actually, is that people from very many different indigenous societies, and of course, let's not generalize here as to that perspective. There are many different indigenous worldviews and different people engaging from within them. But we have been in really rich conversation with people, knowledge holders from a wide range of indigenous worldviews, from Hawaiian cosmology. Actually, we had Kamana Bima from Hawaii on our opening call this morning, to Bhutan, to Aboriginal and conceptions from Australia, saying actually what we see is that the donut provides something of a bridge between our worldview and the Western economic mindset that has been largely imposed upon much of the world. So if we want to situate the donut in relation, if I say at one end is kind of Western growth centric neoliberal economic mindset, and at the other end is indigenous cosmologies, I think the donut has come to play a role as a bridging concept between those two worlds. So many people who have started their life in a Western economic mindset have used or encountered the donut, and it's taken them towards a far richer cosmology. They may go on past it and say, no, I'm going to go all the way into indigenous Maori worldviews. Others have said, come back in the other direction. I need to engage with the Western mindset from my indigenous cosmology, and the donut acts as a bridging tool that actually enables me to connect with it. Some people say, of everything I see coming out of Western economics, the donut actually makes most sense to me. Yes, it somehow separates humans and the rest of the living world, but in another way, it brings them together. Show me another diagram from Western economics that has them together. So it's bringing them together. And it's the point in between, it's the donut green space in between that invites the multiplicities of ways in which they're connected. So you could either say it separates them, or you could say it brings them together. Depends where you're starting from. And that's why it can be used as a bridging concept. We warmly invite people to say, I want to go beyond the donut. If you think it's got a human exceptionalism or an anthropocentrism, by all means, design something else that you think goes further. Go further across that bridge. But we're finding that it's useful to enough people to converse across both ways to keep it as a concept that helps us connect. That's my response to that question right now. I'm going to ask, Suhail ask a question, and I'm going to put this to Andrew. Do you think that the boundary limits, the absolute values themselves, and I think this might be about planetary boundaries, might change in the coming years due to uncertainty or new assessments? Andrew, what would you say about that?
So in several of the updates, in each of the updates, I would say there have been changes to the specific boundary indicators. In some cases, it's reducing the uncertainty. For example, in the very first planetary boundaries framework in 2009, the uncertainty range of the climate change indicator was between 350 and 550 parts per million is the range of uncertainty. Whereas in the 2015 version, they narrowed that to 350 to 450 based on increasing understanding of climate science. And there have been other updates to the indicators over the time. So one of the reasons why we use the planetary boundaries framework is actually because it can accommodate that evolution of understanding as science advances. Both the donut and the planetary boundaries framework have that ability to evolve as knowledge advances built into them. And I think that that's a really important part of the donut and of the planetary boundaries framework. I think that's why they work so well together. As Kate showed on her very, very first slide, really the core concept of the donut is that we aim to avoid critical human deprivation, whatever that means in this moment in time, and we aim to avoid critical planetary degradation based on our best understanding of what that means, again, based on our this moment in time. And so that's how I would answer it. I don't have any particular indicator that I know will be getting adapted in the coming years or anything though.
Great. Okay, and I'm going to pick up another. There's so many questions coming in. I'm going to pick up a question from Ettore, which says the former donut framework was growth agnostic. Can we finally say that degrowth is needed to finally get in the donut while granting access for everyone to their basic needs? Okay, a lot going on in this question. So the donut framework is intended to be relevant to the whole world and relevant as a concept to countries everywhere. So it's about people everywhere meeting their fundamental human needs while doing so within the means of the living planet. And of course, it's going to look very different by nation. If we showed you a scatter plot of nations, you'd see, which Andrew has created with his colleagues Dan O'Neill and others, you would see that Malawi has massive human shortfall and has very little overshoot of planetary boundaries, whereas the United States and all high-income countries still have actually human shortfall, but huge overshoot of planetary boundaries. So countries are in very, very different starting positions. So the goal for the donut is to get into the donut. It's to reduce overshoot of planetary boundaries and meet all people. When I listen to folks, leading degrowth thinkers like Jason Hickel, Yorgos Kallis, and I listen to how they're defining degrowth, they are saying it's a planned reduction in consumption or production so that we come back within planetary means with a socially just transformation that meets the needs of all. It's extremely close in definition to getting into the donut from both sides at the same time. Now we come to the question of which countries are we talking about? If I'm talking about a country like Malawi, I'm not going to make the claim that Malawi should do this without GDP growth. Some people may believe so. I personally believe that as Malawi seeks to meet that, I'm just using Malawi as an example, as Malawi seeks to meet the very many deprived needs of its people, health, education, housing, transport, energy, that economic activity, however it's provided, I believe that will show up as an increase in what would be measured as its national income. That's my personal view. Middle income countries, much more of a bigger question, especially because many of them are overshooting planetary boundaries already. So how are they going to combat within planetary boundaries? Are they going to do that with an increasing income? How are they going to do that? If so, that's never been done before. High income countries, and this is where I think the degrowth conversation often begins, but I think it's really important to recognize we're talking about the whole world and not to generalize. I personally have not seen any evidence that high income countries are able to come back within planetary boundaries at the speed and scale required, both in terms of their carbon emissions and in terms of their material impact with a growing GDP. There is no country that has yet shown that this is possible. Yes, many countries have rising GDP and falling, even consumption-based carbon emissions, but they're falling at maybe 1/5 or less of the speed or scale that's required. And the material footprint hasn't even begun falling. So there is no evidence that I've seen that countries can combine growth and coming back within planetary boundaries. And it is therefore a profound challenge, especially starting in high income countries, to end the structural dependence on endless economic growth that they currently have. Massive challenge, so that we can actually seek to become regenerative and distributive rather than grow endlessly. Now, my friends online who frame this as degrowth, please, you articulate that view. And I think it's really important to be clear what we're using, because as many people know, when we speak of degrowth, it's very often misunderstood that you want to make the economy go down. And I've often found if I use that framing in public debate, it turns into a smokescreen. So I would much rather argue from this space, from the donut, come into the donut from both sides. There's no evidence that I've seen in high income countries that it's compatible with a growing economy, and therefore we need to end our structural dependence on endless growth. So I hope that clarifies that question. But if we're looking at the whole world, who is to say which countries can possibly have GDP growth and which countries can't? I think at a much lower income level, I strongly argue that they will and they can and they should. And it gets much more difficult to the middle. But I wouldn't position myself as somebody saying that country can have GDP growth and that country can't. I warmly welcome scholars in that space to start setting out criteria for that. I hope that helps. Andrew, I'm going to pass to you. There's a question here that says, how much is the focus on updating the concept or framework versus embedding donor economics into government strategies, curricula, business commitments, etc.? Is there a choice between these two? That's an interesting question.
That is an interesting question. I would say that, well, how we've approached the Doughnut Economics Action Lab has been to to work across themes, so to speak, so that I'm leading more of the research and data analysis side of things, which has been part of the updating of the data and the latest conceptual changes that we made. But at the same time, my colleagues, Leonora Gercheva is the Cities and Regions lead, Xiaoting Hu Jones is our Government and Policy lead, who are working together with local governments and state and national and international governments at that level. Carolina Escobar Tello is our Schools and Education lead. Rob Shorter is leading our Communities and Arts work, and more. So I would say that in transforming the concepts of donut economics into action, that we have been aiming to work with, really we exist in order to support the practitioners who are inspired by those ideas already. So I would say the update of the global donut is one step towards making sure that, that this tool, this visual framework is as up to date and relevant as possible. But at the same time, it's of course, it's just one tool. And we certainly don't believe that a single monitoring framework is going to suddenly, transform the growth-based economic system. Much more, we see it as I said, as a tool that practitioners and activists and anyone really could pick up this tool and use it as a diagram to advocate for transformative action in their places. So I don't see a need to separate.
Great. Quick question for you, Andrew. Ben says, can you tell us a little about your use of AI to slice and dice the data?
See, this is something that I should learn. I'm maybe like many of you. I am still learning about the possibilities of AI. I haven't used it at all. I'm kind of old school in terms of developing or structuring or any part of this analysis, really. So I have just as much to learn in response to that question as well, I have everything to learn. I haven't used
Have
it.
you used AI to slice and dice the data?
Have I
Have
used it?
you? Have you?
No, no.
Okay, there we go. Okay. There's a question. From Dominic? What does a more than human donut look like? Would it be any different? Great question, Dominic. Actually, I've begun a conversation with Cesar Rodriguez Garavito, who is one of the founders of the More Than Human Collective. He actually took the donut and incorporated into the opening chapter of a book by the More Than Human Collective, arguing that actually he took it as it is and said that the inside the social foundation is the human rights and the ecological ceiling is the more than human rights. So that was his opening proposition. We sat down together recently and said, would we want to modify the donut if we wanted to make it more than human? This goes back to this question of is it anthropocentric? So I'm hoping that we will lean into this in the More Than Human Festival, the Moth Festival in May in 2026, which I believe is going to be in London. And I hope there will be a session exactly exploring this. But I've been encouraging students I've run into for some years to say, well, if you did bring all living beings into the social foundation, so it's not just human, but all living beings there, would that improve the concept? Would it be more useful? And how would you begin to bring principles that would distinguish between the needs and wants of different living beings? How would we find ways to share? Is it the honorable harvest that's been articulated by Robin Wall Kimmerer? Is it half earth? Is it the rights of nature? What principles could we turn to if we find ourselves all living beings in the social foundation? We have 2 minutes, which I believe then means we need to close. And I'm sorry that there are many more questions we haven't managed to answer, but I'm going to hand back to Andrew. Andrew, in 10 years' time, I'm going to throw you 10 years' time. What is this going to still exist? Is it going to still be tracking things? And what do you hope it will have done? Didn't know I
Ooh,
was going to throw that one at you, did you?
no, I wasn't expecting that one. But I would hope that, we could see donuts everywhere. That we have this global snapshot, that we found ways to translate this global concept down to smaller scales, whether that's at the city or the national or the bioregion, ideally, because I feel like that's the kind of area where we can acknowledge that we are integrated and part of this beautiful and delicately balanced planet. And so I guess for a monitoring framework, that's something that I would love to see. Does it need to be real time and even ever more monitoring and ever more thing? Then there's a part of me that's like, yeah, sure, that'd be cool, with satellites and who knows what else. But another part of me is actually really sees data as secondary to communicating the concept, the paradigm, the worldview that we need to be in balance with humanity and the rest of the non-human, more than human world. And so if we can communicate that, then I think that we would be doing quite well. 10 years, let's make it 5.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Right. Well, I'd say we're at the end. Thank you so much for joining this making time to spend it here together with us. Please do check out the rest of the Global Donut Days 2025 online program. It's really, really exciting. It has far more inspiring and probably possibilities for action than what we have presented here today. But it's really, really glad to be able to share all of this work with you. It's been a long time. And
Yeah.
thanks to Kate, thanks to the GDD team, all the interpreters, and have a great day.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody.